Hi, everybody. Welcome back to Priceless Advice with Leaders of Volunteers. I am absolutely delighted to have as my guest today Corina Sadler. Corina, say hello.
Hey everybody.
Yay! And we're talking to Corina through the power of Zoom from Plano, Texas. And you, congratulations on your 10-year anniversary with City of Plano. Is that correct?
Yeah, 10 years full time, and I started 2 years part time. So 12 years with the city of Plano and about 15 in local government.
Fantastic. And we also know each other through our service with Alive. I was on the board for several years. You're on many very effective committees. We were on a membership committee meeting together earlier today. And you're also involved with a lot of professional development. I think that's why I consider you, and I know I'm not alone in this because you've actually won awards. Uh, you're such a great leader in the sector, as particularly around professional development, and you're also a CVA. We're in our CVA club. So tell us about like what are some of the things that our profession is having real challenges with right now, and how are you being impacted by kind of the current pandemic challenges or economic challenges or just these drastic life changes that we're seeing?
Yeah, so I'm a classic joiner. I'm a big joiner, right? So you have different types of people that you run into, especially when you're on a lot of different associations and you go to different meetings. And now we're in Zoom. So I'm one of those people that joins stuff and says yes and just gets super pumped about it, right? I'm a total nerd for volunteer engagement, which is nothing wrong with that. So my fellow nerds out there for VEP, it's what we do. Um, so I think now I'm watching different associations pivot to figure out how to keep their volunteer professionals engaged in associations, both locally, nationally. And I also see lots of brand new volunteer managers popping up online because they're needing help and saying, I started 3 months ago, I started 6 months ago. And so they're looking for support. And I think we have a sector, we have so many great minds that are out there willing to share, that I really see this as a critical time to help other volunteer managers with their work. And we do see the furloughs, we see the layoffs happening, and I think it's going to roll through different regions of the US and globally at different times, just kind of depending on their, big cities or small towns and stuff like that. So I think those of us that are, keeping our positions feel very fortunate and are wanting to work really hard on keeping our volunteers engaged and then still staying up to date professionally with what's happening in the sector. I see so many people saying, well, what are you guys doing with reopening? Or what does your COVID waiver look like? Or I'm afraid, and I think that that's okay. And we're creating these safe places online to talk to each other. And so I think there's so much value in that. And I really applaud all of these associations that are volunteer run. We're volunteers also, in keeping the conversations going and being there.
So networking is important. I mean, that's how we met, which is super important. And urging particularly new managers in the volunteer sector or leaders of volunteers, and we'll get specifically into a Tuesday tip a little later, but I want to dig deeper into networking for the sector and kind of how do we expand our this brand awareness that there are these local dovias, directors of volunteers and agencies, or in the US where we are Alive, Association of Leaders in Volunteer Engagement, but Canada has an equivalent, UK has an equivalent, Australia, South America. So just even within the states and within our local areas, how do you think we can help people realize that this network of peers is there and valuable?
It's a struggle. And I think it's going to be online content for a large period of time. I mean, we're not going to be able to get together in person. So how can we market ourselves online to reach new people and how can we create content when we're all volunteering to lead these groups. And I think when the Facebook page goes dormant, when the website isn't updated, when the Zoom meetings are happening, but who's getting the links? Are new people even able to register? I think these are, everyone's panicked, but I think we're going to get to a place where we're going to figure it out. And I do see some Dovias figuring it out, doing a great job of having a presence online, of doing some social mixers, or what they call it, in the evenings, or doing some raffles, and they're going to mail you something, or sending out a card. I got a card from one of my Dovia groups in the mail, which I thought was really nice. And it was just a good reminder. But I think to attract this next generation and of volunteer engagement professionals and the people that were newly hired within the last year, to keep them, I feel like it's got to go online, and we have to figure out what that conversation looks like and how to be welcoming, but not get lost in all the messaging. I mean, it's just, we're getting inundated with Zoom calls and emails, and everyone's pivoting to virtual. But I think there's a lot to be said for our sector. We are so specific, and we have such specific things to talk about, that the value is huge. But it's, associations like Alive, I mean, they've always been virtual.
Hmm. Yeah, Alive, it's been easy. We were talking about this morning in our membership committee meeting, is any online virtual. I know Jane Cravens hates the word virtual because everything is real. We're not in a
Sorry,
holodeck.
Jane.
But yeah, hi Jane. She's totally watching right now. And but those of us who are already kind of in this medium, or used to video, or used to a lot of webinars, or in an online, not geo-specific, not geo-locked type of organization, it's pretty easy to pivot. But we kind of have, I'm just going to call it out there, we as leaders of volunteers, and particularly the nonprofit world, we have a pretty poor reputation for being good at technology. And like to your point, it's so important to have a professional online presence. And I also want to give people the grace and compassion to, like, in this case, the perfect is the enemy of the good, of having a presence, of having some sort of website that is functional and not weird and hard to navigate, is really better than nothing right now. And I've run into so many organizations that don't even have a website, and they don't realize that we can recruit highly skilled volunteers and web designers, that people will give their time and their talent to help us create these tools. We don't have to know how to do it ourselves. In addition to, I mean, I think I agree that mentoring is the best way to kind of stay in this career path. But are some other changes that you would love to see within the sector or by agencies that help people not be burned out in that department of one?
I I feel like promoting professional development beyond, volunteer management 101, 102 maybe. I think promoting new skill sets that relate to volunteer engagement, and promoting those trainings and opportunities to us would be probably next level. It would be motivating, it would be reinvigorating of your position. I took a nonprofit marketing certificate program, and that was really cool. And I was the only volunteer manager in that room, and I didn't care. I was there to learn, and I knew it would apply to the work that I do, and it definitely did. And it really got me excited again about our newsletter and our print materials and our content. Um, and when I'm posting on social media, as a professional, things like that, or something on my bucket list, like learning how to edit videos, which we've talked about. How do you make those snippets look so cool, and all these things? When you think that's somebody else's sector, right? Well, it doesn't have to be. We can learn these things too, and we can harness them to improve our programs, and we can be the total package. I think there's so much for working with people. 100%, right? We do that flawlessly. Volunteer engagement professionals are the pinnacle of people. but there are so many other things you can add to that that I think would be that kind of renewal, to get re-energized. And I think a lot of how we place value on ourselves within our organization is going to get us to that point where we can have some of those extra things, and harness some of that, more development. Um,
I totally agree. I'm going to yes and everything you say. That's what I'm going to do today, Karina. And I also really always want to push the idea, and sometimes it's introducing this idea to people, that the more your agency or your direct report, your supervisors, your leadership team, the deciders, the board, whoever that may be, the more they see you are excelling as a respected professional in your sector, and you're asked to speak, and you're asked to make these online appearances, and you're asked to write articles and contribute to blogs, that you have your CVA, certification in volunteer administration, that I can speak from my experience, that helped me rocket as high as I possibly could when I was still working with government agencies, because not only, and they're not going to notice it unless you point it out. So there has to be a bit of self-promotion to help our profession very locally in the agency you're in and the region you're in, and also potentially by joining a live or some Dovey, or doing some work around that. But we have to kind of blow our own horns to everyone else in our department. They tend to be siloed. Development might be over here, or education might be over here. There's, and particularly government, sometimes we're very, not now with Zoom, but very physically far away from each other's offices. And I think this type of online medium that we're forced to do during the great pause of the pandemic, this gives us some opportunities to interact and cross-train in a lot of new ways. So I know you've had some successes and disappointments in your government career, and particularly around the pandemic. So if someone's a decider in an organization, how have you successfully advocated for recognizing the value of the people who are the leaders of volunteers, you yourself and your other staff? And what are some of the ways that we can kind of have that information really sink in to the leadership of an agency where they might already feel overwhelmed or really panicked right now?
So, so through the Texas Volunteer Management Conference, as I serve on a committee for the conference, we've been doing webinars, we've been bringing out some content, and I had a panel where we talked about this same topic, it was called Because You're Worth It. And in that, I talked about shameless self-promotion of yourself as a volunteer engagement professional. I took a spin on really the social media content that you create, but I think sometimes, we get hired into these positions because we are people and we work really well with others, but then we get lost sometimes in the touting of our volunteers and our organization, that we get buried in that story. And what I try to do is pull myself out as a professional. Now, when I talk about me as a professional online, if you look at my LinkedIn content, or anything that you might see, it's always me, my volunteers in my program. We are together as one. There's no, I'm not shining a spotlight just on me personally. We're all encompassing. And so in my organization, we're Team Plano. And that's something that they really work on, that we understand. And so for me, that's part of that. It's a team. So, it's difficult for some people to do that, to toot their own horn, to say, I got my CVA, I want my picture in the newsletter, and I want this and I want that, and people need to know this was a credential, and I took an exam, and not everyone's like that, and that's okay. But I think whatever level you can get to that shameless self-promotion is going to be so impactful within your organization, that you become the subject matter expert on volunteerism and service, and they will come to you and they will ask you things and they will look for your content, and you really get plugged into a lot of those conversations. Now, when COVID hit, everyone was scrambling, and certain things may have happened at organizations that on paper wouldn't have happened that way, but in the heat of the moment, people make decisions, and that's part of what we understand as also program managers, that things are going to happen, and they're going to happen fast. and you look at the greater good, and we will, roll up our sleeves and get back to work. And I think that's the great thing about volunteer engagement professionals, is that we are very focused on the mission and we know how to get there. And this is a bump in the road.
Yeah, it's a significant bump on the road. We also, as a species, tend to be, and as a profession, really flexible and really adaptable. And I think that, part of
Okay,
what
mountain in the road. Sorry.
it's a mountain in
Giant
the road.
mountain in the road.
Yeah,
Sorry. I don't want to sound like that.
like there's been an earthquake. I'm in California. I can say this realistically, and the road is cracked, and a big mountain has risen up.
Yes,
We're trying
sorry.
to, and some of us are trying to like go over it, and some are trying to plow through, and all of that. And I've also been in agencies where I knew, again, on paper and in person, that I was liked, I was valued, I was respected. And I've also been right in the middle of situations where I've been with agencies sometimes for, close to a decade, and somebody up high, who I know likes me and respects me, makes a really panicked decision about the program, or something that doesn't just affect me, but affects employees in a way that those of us who are middle or mid upper management were like, "Er?" A little RCA confused dog face, like what? Um, and I still think of those as learning moments. I don't want to ever shame leadership or have them lose their sense of value of us or start to have an unpleasant feeling or dislike. But typically, we used to call them in conservation agency acorns from the sky, because someone would have a little seed of an idea that they thought was great, but by the time it dropped from their upper orbit down to hit the volunteers and the people in the field, it was like an atomic bomb going off, and it was having a violent and unhelpful impact. And I've navigated this with government agencies over and over and over again, and I just stopped taking it personally. But I also, when we had enough data of how badly that landed and what we had to do to kind of maybe rebuild trust in the community and the team, and sometimes how challenging or how effective or how ineffective it was to message the policy changes or the types of communication. When I brought that data back to them, they're like, "Oh, okay." And that tended to help other years down the line have that little light bulb of realization of we must check in with our in-house expert on volunteer engagement. And so even training, it's called feeding the elephant sometimes in management circles, of kind of training up, managing up, feeding the elephant. Um, just getting a seat at the table, or planting a seed of, oh, I really do need to ask our leader volunteers, or bounce this idea off of them before it happens. And so much of that good intention and logic is lost in a panic, especially a financial panic. What are some successes that you've had with, and we also know government sometimes is really limited by law. We're limited by Freedom of Information Act, public law, transparency, good governance. There's a lot more that's in the structure that we can't always change as much as in the CSR corporate world, or the nonprofit world. But what are some of the successes that you've had over your 10 or 12 or 15 years in local government, where you've been able to say, hey, this didn't work so great, but let's do it this way from now on?
Discussions like this are, I love that these are happening, I think, all across the US, when someone comes to their association or their Zoom meeting and says, this is what has happened to me. What do I do next? And there are dialogues like this saying, don't forget, did you look at this, bring them the data,
Mm-hmm.
pull this report, show them this, to give these, volunteer managers that perspective that they feel, okay, I'm going to go back and we're going to get back on track. And I think it's really important to think about these things, because not everything is rosy right now. And I think there's a reality there, and there is a professional way to handle it. So I think these are, great opportunities to engage with your groups out there when your volunteer managers get together. The success of my program has really been building our relationships with staff. We provide trainings to our paid staff about their roles, engaging volunteers, and we set expectations with them as the subject matter experts, myself and my colleague Rebecca. So we lead those trainings with them. We provide a 4-page annual report where I consolidate everything that's happened in the year across all of our different departments. So really trying to pull all of these different staff and volunteers out of their silos to be under the umbrella of our organization as a whole, to where, you know, if you're a library volunteer and you're an environmental education volunteer or you're a fire department volunteer, and those staff, they have opportunities to connect and to see themselves side by side. So I think that the investment that we put into building those staff relationships with our volunteers and then with the volunteer management team has really paid off. And we, you know, we provide support for our paid staff. We only have 3 volunteer coordinators within the city by title, but we have probably about 200 staff that work with volunteers. So they're looking to us to kind of guide them in that journey.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, we've always set a lot of, you know, high expectations, you know, all around. I mean, our residents expect a lot of us as city staff. And we've always been really careful about the content that we put out and what we ask volunteers to do, looking at, you know, risk and liability and safety and all that. So I think now in COVID, we're extra careful about the content and what we're asking our volunteers and telling them, because their expectation is that we would only ask them to do something if it's 100% safe.
Mm-hmm.
We
Absolutely.
can't, you know, we can't guarantee that right now, so we're not going to make those asks. And so it, you know, it changes the volunteer program for a period of time, but I think having all of these things in place is really going to support us, you know, moving forward. And our volunteers are our fans, so they're our advocates. They learn about, you know, city services and functions by volunteering alongside staff, and those are just such great relationships to keep.
It's so important to have not just in-service trainings, but really, I consider it empowering, and trying to think of other words, kind of knighthood, or sometimes people use deputizing, but that's taken on a connotation these days. But it's really empowering staff that they're part of the volunteer engagement team, that it isn't siloed in just you and Rebecca, or a department of 1 or a department of 12, whatever size the organization is. And I would do regularly with my government agencies, usually once every year or 2, depending on how many staff changes we had, or if I felt people were kind of falling off the information wagon, or weren't keeping up with changes in the programs, where I would take just like an hour all staff meeting, or a couple of all staff meetings that people could attend in their flexible schedules, on Volunteer Management 101 and the basics of our program. And I would put a fun little quiz like, what's the minimum age to be trail patrol? You know, what's a requirement to be a docent? Just things that, as they're having conversations, not only with the teams of our unpaid team members or volunteers that they're working with, but so many, as you know, city staff, even with masks on, there's a lot of maintenance people and parks maintenance and rangers who still need to be out in the community. And they're having conversations, even if they're a nice, safe double mask 10 feet apart. The best recruitment that we have, and the best tool, is a happy volunteer being that advocate and having a good experience and talking about it. But also, when any other member of team, and I love the Team Plano idea, has at least 2 or 3 pieces of the correct initial onboarding information, I think that's so helpful, and that's so powerful. And I've seen it from a distance of, you know, how successful that's been with your work in Plano, and winning multiple awards around your leadership and your program design, and just the culture that you've built is really important. And at that point, how can an executive director not notice how amazing that is? How can a city general manager, or you know, someone on the board of supervisors not notice how amazing that is, and start to recognize that? So that builds to blowing our own horn and being our own best uh, promoters, self promoters, in doing that.
There's stories everywhere. And I think sometimes if we have, you know, my program is 37 years old. So when we have, you know, older programs, or we have programs where volunteers are kind of doing repetitive tasks, maybe they're delivering meals, or they're only answering the phones, or something like that. Not only, but one of their tasks is answering phones. Sometimes we get caught up in not explaining those things in a new way, right? Not looking in the details to find something new. And so sometimes when I talk to people, talking about their content, it's like pulling out stories, finding things and talking to people and looking around. And I know now we're virtual, but sometimes it's, somebody has a private Facebook group with their volunteers, really reading what people are saying and looking for some, some gems to be able to put in a newsletter or to send out to a staff email. And we made our newsletter public, which is one of the things that changed for me after I did my marketing training. We kind of reformatted our newsletter. I made it a public subscription for the very first time. I tried to go from an exclusive club of just staff and volunteers to really inclusive community type newsletter. And we grew at 193% subscribers in 12 months. So I think making fans in the community is so vital to volunteer programs, that they, people feel really good and they want to know what's happening in their backyard, and they might not be able to donate or they might not have the time to volunteer, but they still want to know what's happening. And if you seem like you have a lot of things going on, you have information to give, people are going to gravitate towards that and they're going to subscribe. And we've, now I've grown our fan base just on our subscriber side. So that's been really powerful for me, is saying, why not? Why can't we share what we're doing with the community? Why would we want it to be so internalized? And we also include sharing the stories of our paid staff alongside of our volunteers. So if our paid staff are out, doing a career day presentation, or they are mentoring a child through some other nonprofit, I'm going to put those stories side by side with volunteers. And I'm going to claim that content because it's good and people like it and they're going to feel great. And then they're going to scroll on, they're going to move on, and that's okay. We're in such a micro story era that you have a little bit of time to make them feel good and remember you for a second, and then they're going to move on, and you've got that click, and you built them as a fan.
Yeah, and sometimes it takes 3 seconds, 30 seconds, 3 minutes. Typically is what people watch. If there's, I've done a lot of YouTube analytics data, and typically most people, if they know that they have a nice, easy, short video and they just have that little bit of time to watch it, they'll go through that. And when they have time to sit down, 20, 30 minutes for something more in depth like this, then they schedule themselves to do that. And I love that it's so important. This is one of our values that I know you and I share, just that sense of team, completely removing the barriers or the silos or the walls or the sense of otherness of volunteers or as an add-on program or something nice to have, versus this is an integrated strategy to the success of our agency and the mission and the work that we're doing. And having that equal opportunity media exposure, telling all the stories, telling how the stories interact, is culturally a huge, wonderful, successful way to create that sense of team versus some staff attitudes are either occasionally hostile, but we try to change that, or they're neutral to working with volunteers, or they're positive. And I've done in my in trainings with my agencies and with others, it's like our job is to move everybody over at least to neutral, but ideally to positive. That we leave this workshop and no one has hostility or preconceived biases or fears or all these made up, weird negative narratives that they can get in their heads, or they had a bad experience once a while ago and they're stuck on that. That it's all of our jobs all of the time to help these interactions with volunteers and the rest of the team, the community at large, create these positive memories. Like you said, it might be one click or one like, oh, that was cute, I'm going to retweet that, and then they get on with their day. And we all have really different priorities shifting every day right now of where our time and our attention and our talent needs to be. And as we kind of maybe start to wrap up this interview, is there anything else that you want to share, particularly um, for our peers that might be in not great situations right now, who are in that huge percentage, who are kind of paused for the cause, or they're not sure what that next move is?
Definitely. And I encourage, volunteer managers to reach out, to get support, to find a group online or whatever it looks like for you, however you're comfortable engaging, to definitely get support during this time if you are struggling. If you have expectations set on you from your organization and you're not sure, I mean, we are open books most of the time. You email us, you say, I need help, you post on a Facebook group. I'm redoing my handbook. They've told me to do it in a week. What do I do? Keep asking, keep trying. And I think for the people on the other end, please don't tell people just to Google stuff.
Yeah,
Please,
overwhelming.
please
Yeah,
send them
overwhelming.
a link to a
Yeah.
Susan J. Ellis article
Yep.
or something from Volunteer Pro or Volunteer Match. I mean, there's so many specific resources that please just don't tell them to Google it, because that's not what they need to hear right now. They're in the moment. And I just encourage everyone to keep going and to value all that you've done. And if you are in a place where you're looking for new opportunities, look at your dynamic list of all the things that you've done and make sure that your resume reflects that. We're so multi-talented and multifaceted in this work. There's so many things that we do that you really need to take a close look at that and make sure that you're reflective. Never say you're just the leader of volunteers, because then someone else is going to get your reference call and say she was just the leader of volunteers. You always want to make sure that you are talking about yourself at the highest level, because you're doing great work, and we're here for you.
We are, and again, Alive, Association of Leaders in Volunteer Engagement, is in the States, and it has a lot of value. It's a membership organization, but even for non-members, there are a lot of free webinars or trainings to go to. Some of the other ones that you mentioned that I love, because we're always learning. I'm always learning. I've been 20-something years in this, and there's always something new to learn, especially in a new situation like we're in right now. Volunteermatch.org has a COVID-19 specific resources for leaders of volunteers and people who are looking for COVID specific roles and opportunities. And Alive's website is volunteeralive.org. I'll put all these links. And my favorite has been, because they're also hosting the Susan Ellis Archives, which is great historical information and still incredibly valuable best practices for current day and age, rest her soul. But Energize Inc. So energizeinc.com also has a very detailed and very growing every day dedicated page to COVID-19 articles, information, resources for leaders of volunteers. And they've done that extra step, which is so work intensive, and I really appreciate the whole team over at Energize, and Betsy and Rob and everybody, where they've even done it subsector, like animal care, health services, human services. So those are just the beginnings of some resources. People can totally cyberstalk you on LinkedIn and the Facebooks and the Tweeters. And they can totally cyberstalk me, and also by watching this channel. And probably my final question for you, Corina, and this might be the most important question of the entire interview, which is why I saved it. So just thinking cap, invisible thinking cap on, save it for the end. Um, how is your quarantine hair so fabulous? And why do I look like I'm a reject from a Partridge Family reunion show?
Oh, you were so funny, Dana. But yes, it's my hair. You will find it online. So it's natural. So just, shout out to all my Hispanic volunteer managers with your hair down in the Texas heat. It's difficult, but, gotta look good for Dana.
I appreciate the fabulousness, and it looks like it was effortless. I put a lot of effort into my hair, and it still came out like this.
Looking good.
I
You're
don't
looking good.
Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate it. I really appreciate your time. It's always a delight to talk to you. And we've talked in so many in-person and online social situations in our work together with Alive and other organizations. But I'm so glad to finally have you on Priceless Advice. And I wish you well. And everybody, I'll put Corina's LinkedIn information if you want to connect with her and get in touch. And not that you weren't a very busy person, because you have a family life and a work life, but you're so generous with your time, and you're such a great example as a mentor and a lifelong student and a wonderful leader in our sector. And I love and respect and appreciate you so much. And I'm very
Just
glad
every
to have you
day.
on the show.